Hello and welcome. The land of the free is how America describes itself in its national anthem, but how truly free is it? The US Congress is currently considering a controversial bill that could make it one of the biggest media censors in the world. In early December, the US House of Representatives voted by an overwhelming majority to pass a bill punishing Arab TV stations that engage in, quote, anti-American incitement to violence. The support for the bill was somewhat ironic, as the current Congress is known for not finding common ground on most issues. The wording of the bill is vague, but punishments for Arab TV stations that criticize US policy or air statements by people who threaten America with violence would be stiff. One of the recommendations of the bill would be to designate the satellite providers of those TV stations as specially designated global terrorists and impose tough sanctions on them. The bill, known as House Resolution 2278, has to pass many stages before it becomes law, but it's shocked many for contradicting American support for media freedom. Today we ask, what are the grounds for America taking such a strong stance on censorship when it claims to champion free speech? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or message on Twitter, and we'll also take your phone calls on the show. Well, joining us today is Lawrence Pintak, a veteran journalist who's covered the Muslim world for decades. He directed the Center for Journalism Training and Research at the American University in Cairo for the past 4 years and is now the Dean of the College of Communication at Washington State University, from where he joins us. With me here in Washington, D.C. is Khairi Abaza, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, where he studies reform in the Arab world and the influence of media on politics. Earlier, he worked for the Wafd Party, a small but influential opposition group in Egypt. Gentlemen, I welcome you to the show. And Lawrence Pintak, if I can start with you, how surprised are you by this move taken by the U.S.?
Well, I'm never surprised by what happens in Washington, first of all. But certainly, as you point out in the lead-in, this undermines basic American values of free press and freedom of speech, and it makes a mockery of recent administration condemnations of Arab media censorship. It also, once again, sets us up as hypocrites.
Well, you know, to what extent is Congress infringing on the freedom of speech in the Arab world by taking this move?
Well, it would certainly seem to. The irony here is that just a couple of weeks ago, Hillary Clinton singled out Egypt and Saudi Arabia for their censorship on the internet. And this law would designate their satellite providers, because they're the ones carrying these controversial channels, would designate them as global terrorists.
Khairi Abaza, what is this message from America going to do to the Arab world? What kind of message is it sending out to them?
First, we have to look at this as a message more than something that we can implement right away, because before it becomes a law, it has to be approved by the Senate, and then it has to be ratified by the President, so it's a long process. So the signal it is sending that any political group, because these TV channels belong to political groups, namely Hezbollah and Hamas, that engage in violence against civilians, is not accepted in the United States. And the issue that it is, when we speak about bipartisan politics in Washington, and we say that it's not really working except for this issue, because the country, the United States, is very sensitive to the issue of radical Islamist terrorism. So that's why I don't think that many congressmen will take the risk to reject this law or to oppose it.
But it doesn't it, to some degree, give an excuse to any sort of the autocrats or some considered dictators in the Middle East to be able to say, well, listen, if America can crack down on who it doesn't like, we can do the same?
Absolutely, and the information ministers of the Arab League met, and they are trying to issue some new regulations concerning the media, and the reason for this, the official reason, is to stop the US interference in internal Arab affairs, because they consider it an interference in internal Arab affairs. But we all know that the regimes in the Arab world are autocratic, and this could lead to a freedom of speech catastrophe in the Arab world.
Let's get in a caller here, because we have Lee in Virginia on the phone with us. Lee, what would you like to ask?
Hi, Riz.
Hi.
Exactly what punitive measures will the United States take, since most satellites, even though most satellites are American-owned, there are some satellites that can be used for news, etc., that are not American-owned. So, what exactly can the United States do?
Let me ask this to Khairi Abaza.
Well, provided that this becomes a law, and of course it's a long process and we're not there yet, it would mean that any companies or corporations that deal with these media outlet, if they are designated, it's as if they are dealing with terrorist organizations, and there are grave consequences to this dealing with the terrorist organization. So of course it is very risky business for this television channel and satellite providers as well.
Jack's on the line from Italy. Jack, good to have you with us too. What would you like to ask?
Okay, I would like to make a comment.
Please.
For me, this is just a political re-election stunt for the coming election. God bless our President Obama would never vote. He would veto such a thing. This is just something to get votes, to stand up, to talk for the re-election only. It's not possible in America with our Constitution to pass such a law, and our beautiful president would never vote for it. He would veto it. It's just something to get the re-election.
Jack, thanks for that point. Let's put that to Larry Pentak. It's an interesting perspective on what might be just politicking for the sake of elections.
Well, it's politicking, but it's also unenforceable. That's the bottom line on this thing. It's actually very silly. The idea, back to this question of enforcement, if these satellite providers were designated as global terrorists, it would mean that there could be no U.S. business contact with them or diplomatic contact. These are owned by the Egyptian government and by the Saudis. And these carry CNN, CNBC, Fox, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's no way that these are going to just have the plug pulled. What this is doing is supporting the ability of those governments to carry out their own censorship. And it also is fundamentally flawed because clearly these days governments cannot put their finger in the information dike.
Larry, let me put an email, if I could, to you that we got from the Philippines, from a viewer in the Philippines. Abdul Ghani Salapudin in Basilan writes in saying, the US is scared of the other side of the story coming from other media sources. Every story has two sides. To make it balanced and fair, both or all sides must be heard. And if one side is intentionally deprived of his right to be heard, then what is aired is not news but mere propaganda of one side. Knowing the Middle East as you do and having covered all the top stories across that region, when it comes to what this might do for understanding and having a better perspective on how the Middle East functions, what could it do if it was enforced?
Well, there's two things. First of all, there is a fundamental disconnect between the U.S. and the Muslim world and how we see things. And let me go back to something Mr. Abaza said before. He said governments or organizations that are seen to be killing civilians should be sanctioned. Well, from an Arab perspective, as he well knows, the U.S. is perceived as killing civilians. So there's this fundamental disconnect. If those channels were pulled from the air, it's not going to affect how Americans see the world. But it does come back to this free flow of information. What are we afraid of seeing? What are we afraid of hearing? Is our message so weak that we're afraid the other message will be stronger?
Interesting point. I want to put something to you from a viewer as well, if I may please, Khairi. It's a question from Florida in the USA, where Rashid Hajir wrote in saying, why doesn't the US Congress crack down on people who preach hate, like a heinous talk show host, including Rush Limbaugh, Michael Savage? They can put a muzzle on the corrupt Arab media, but they will never shut down our freedom of thought. Why is there so much tolerance for some of these very aggressive Western hosts?
I think it's due to the way the American system functions and the way information is being disseminated. And I think when it comes to the Arab world and the Muslim world, I think that Arabs and Muslims don't do a good job in trying to lobby and raise awareness about attacks on their religion or what they consider as incitement for hatred. So I think it's an Arab and Islamic matter. No one is going to come and tell the Arabs and Muslims, here there is incitement against you, we're going to protect you. But it should be the other way around. They should raise awareness, they should work within the system and show that there are things that are considered incitement to hatred in the Muslim world.
Well, let me show you and our viewers a short cartoon, video clip of a cartoon from Al-Aqsa TV, where the Jews and Israelis are vilified as murderers of Palestinian children, and also the Palestinian police are portrayed as very weak here. Watch this video clip.
شوف بابا أذكى 5 حاجات في الدنيا 3
عارف
الدم الفلسطيني روح بابا اشرب من دمهم وتعال بالسلامة
من عين شلخاي بابا. اسمع أنت يا يهودي يا ضايع، أنت قتلت أبناء شعبي أمام عيني، وأنا حرد عليك بالمزيد من السلام.
Larry Pintock, if I could start with you first. I mean, it's a pretty gruesome cartoon. What it portrays a Jew shooting Palestinian children. It's pretty graphic, blood and, you know, dismembered bodies lying around, and then the Palestinian policeman saying, I'm going to respond with more peace. To what extent is there justification for at least stopping that kind of programming being projected? Certainly it would influence young minds.
It's clearly, it's disgusting stuff. It's unacceptable. But the problem comes back to this issue of the slippery slope. Where do you stop? Once you designate something as unacceptable, then something else comes along and that becomes unacceptable. And so we face this issue of you can only be, you're either pregnant or you aren't. And either you're going to have free speech or you're not going to have free speech. Just the other day I saw a headline in a Canadian newspaper about the arrival of terrorist TV, referring, of course, to Al Jazeera.
Right. No, it's true. Now, Khady Abaza, this is the point. At what point is there a threshold? At what point do people, or can someone say this is acceptable, this is not?
Well, I mean, you showed this video, but I think that the law targets some more serious issues than this. That is the glorification of suicide bombers, and shows with children, with Palestinian children, who in which they teach him glorification of suicide bombers against civilians. So this is the line. Dr. Pintock mentioned earlier that in the Arab world there is a perception that the United States kills civilians, but here the issue is who promotes the killing of civilians in terrorist attacks. And in the case of the United States, we speak about conventional war, which is different, whether the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan. But we haven't seen, I think, in the US media, calls for people to go blow themselves in the middle of Muslim civilians or Arab civilians. I think this is the line to be drawn. I am a strong supporter of the Palestinians, but I am for non-violence. And the problem with this channel is the use of violence against innocent civilians.
So in reality, that cartoon we showed is actually very mild compared with some of the things.
Compared to some of the, most of the things that are being shown. It's under the Al-Aqsa TV received a warning from the Council of Audiovisual in France because of the video clip that they show in which they glorify suicide bombers and things like that.
Well, I'm going to ask you and Mr. Pintock to stand by. We're going to take a very short break here. More of our discussion continues in a moment, so don't go away.